tonight we have a panel, and I'm going to introduce them. So wave when I say your name, okay? LT Magnato, wave at me. All right. He hails from Cleveland, Ohio. LT is passionate about anything related to decorated apparel and has been doing color separations, screen printing, embroidery, dye sublimation, and direct-to-garment for over 16 years strong. Couldn't think of anything else to do, could you? LT currently works at Jack's Prints full-time and is an apparel art director and a director of embroidery. As well, he's doing freelance color separation as Seps Inc. It's seps.ink. Then we have KC Ruby. I think a lot of people already know this guy. KC's groundbreaking work in the industry spans over 30 years, designing and developing for major brands such as Echo and Adidas. He helped to pioneer special effects techniques such as high density and lenticular printing. To this day, he continues to immerse himself in everything involved in the screen printing process and apparel decoration. And 30 years, you might as well call it a career now, right?
May as well.
And then last but not least, we have Tom Davenport. Tom is the original founder of Motion Textile, a business that he grew from a one-man print shop to a multi-million-dollar apparel decoration and distribution operation, which he successfully sold in 2018. He has a broad and in-depth experience in both the business and technical side of apparel decorations and operations. Tom is also co-founder of Ink Kitchen, a media company dedicated to the decorated apparel community. How you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Doing as well as can be.
Right.
All right. So we're going to try to keep this. Well, we always try to keep it around 15 minutes, but it's okay if it goes over a little bit, especially if we got some really interesting going. I'm gonna pop out and bring the presentation up, and Tom's gonna lead this thing, and I'll be watching for comments and questions, which we'll follow up at the end. If you have any questions, you guys put them in. If we can't get to your questions today live, we'll answer them in the feed. So I'll see you guys on the other side.
Well, thanks, Ray. Thanks, Poly1. Thanks for having us be involved in your webinar series. Super excited to be doing this with both Casey and LT, two good friends of mine. I've had the pleasure of working with both of these guys, and can't say enough good about them. And so we wanted to basically do this three-part series breaking down the topic of graphic apparel design. So it's called Understanding Graphic Apparel Design. And we're going to get right into it with part one, which is all about the parts and pieces of graphic apparel design, identifying the specific components. And what we really want to kind of go into is making the distinction between graphic design and graphic apparel design. So we'll start there. Graphic design is ultimately concerned with primary creation of graphical communication through utilization of photography, illustration, typography. Graphic apparel design is ultimately concerned with the creation of graphic-based apparel through the coordination of components, including graphics, materials, and production processes. Really, graphic apparel design is much more in line with product design than just creating visual graphics. LT, Casey, you guys jump in and let me know if I've missed the mark, but I know we've talked about this and we kind of generally tend to see things the same way. Are we on the right track here?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely perfect. Designing specifically for apparel is certainly a niche that not everybody gets.
Big time.
Graphic design in general can be, it can be web banners, but certainly doesn't help in our industry.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of the rules that go into designing a good piece of apparel don't necessarily apply everywhere else in graphic design.
So from there, we can say, we can compare a graphic designer versus a graphic apparel designer. So a graphic designer establishes an aesthetic or works within an established aesthetic, designing graphics to be applied in various forms of communication. As Casey just said, web designer. It really is, again, more about that initial creation. A graphic apparel designer works within that as an established aesthetic, combining a broad knowledge of materials and production processes with an artistic aptitude to develop graphic-based apparel products. I have found through my own personal experience that I could have never, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, but I don't think that it's possible to truly become a graphic apparel designer without having spent time working within a print shop, working with the various technologies that you'd find in an apparel decoration shop.
Yeah, for sure. I came into this from the production side, and I'll tell you, it gave me a much different perspective. Not only creating graphics that work on apparel, especially for apparel, but stuff that also is print friendly. There's a story we had a huge art department at this company called Cirque that I work with, and this particular graphic artist wanted to throw this like shimmery black ink into just the keyline film of one of his prints. And the truth is that we were probably printing 300 pieces less per hour because of that one thing. Aesthetically, it made no difference at all, but yet production it truly killed. So in addition to aesthetically pleasing for apparel graphics, like it's got to be production friendly. At the end of the day, we got to make some money.
So what we can do is we can talk about the components of graphic apparel design. I like to break it down into material components, graphical components, and then the application components. So material components is like your base product. That's the t-shirt, hoodie, tote bag that you're printing on. The inks, the threads, the patches, the woven tags, foil, all the materials that you're working with to create that product. Graphical components are ultimately what you would take in from a graphic designer. Those are the images that are going to be applied in through whatever methods to specific locations on the base product. And then the application components are the actual actions that take place on the production floor. So that's printing, pressing, stitching, sewing, etc. Again, in my work with graphic apparel design, really having a deep understanding of all those different components is where kind of the magic comes in, and understanding how ultimately how they all interact together is really, really crucial. When you take all of these various components and you combine them, they become part of the greater whole, which is this finished piece of apparel. I think that in my experience, what I saw over the years, and as a contract decorator, you're working oftentimes with many parties. So there's the end user. There's oftentimes an ad agency involved. There's a promotional marketing company involved, and then there's the decoration facility. The misunderstanding, I think, is that these components can just be interchanged willy-nilly. A lot of times the salespeople have their ideas. A lot of times, at the the procurement department of the end user company, they have an idea of they like this specific t-shirt, but they don't really care about the graphics. The graphic designers have something in mind, and then they don't have any kind of decision-making power over the blank that's being used. And then of course the decorator wants to have input, and it's too late to make any changes at that point. So again, I found that the components, not respecting the various components that we're working with and how they interact with each other, was a battle that I was always fighting in my business. I think that understanding what a true graphic apparel designer is, respecting that, both from understanding what your job is as a graphic apparel designer, but also for the other parties involved, understanding the importance is really critical. And that graphic apparel designer must understand, they have to have at least a general understanding of all their components and their compatibility with each other. And they must be able to communicate with the respective experts in each component category. So your designer should have an open line of communication with the apparel distributors or manufacturers, with the ink companies, etc. And I think that a lot of times there's just a serious disconnect.
Big time. Yeah, it's funny how many brands and companies I've worked with over the years that do just a ton of apparel design and printing, and the people designing their products have not considered the actual substrate at all. I feel like part of what makes me valuable is that I'm able to take that most of the time and translate that into something that is within their vision of what they were designing for, but on a production side of things makes sense and is able to be ran in a production environment. Casey, I mean, you're somebody who has, designed countless, clothing lines and brands that incorporate different decorating processes in one. Like, how often did you have to kind of freak things that, kind of trickled down to you, or was it always just kind of your call and your decision to, roll with?
One thing I learned from the beginning is that if you're gonna be stuck in that world, like, you're better off leading it and developing techniques that people are chasing, as opposed to you having to chase what somebody else did. And like, for example, here we have a big data company that that does this conference every single year, and their graphic designers always put these giant, humongous prints, like off the shoulder, off whatever. So yeah, I have to then go back in and say, all right, well, this is the version I can give you that's actually printable, because what it was you sent is certainly not. And that happens, and that's so part of our job is to sort of steer this thing into a printable component. So yeah.
So I just wanted to throw out a few questions to you guys, or for us to discuss. What it kind of seems like we're getting in depth here, and I think for a lot of people, the mindset is we're stamping images on t-shirts. Why are you're overthinking this? And I think that for certain print shops, depending on what your customer base is, depending on what the type of work that you're doing, that may be somewhat true. I think that Casey, especially with your background in fashion apparel, LT with music merchandise, which is crosses over into fashion apparel, and certainly in my experience where we did a tremendous amount of retail printing, it really is kind of an elevated level of the form. We're not just schlocking ink on t-shirts. We are actually building products. Why does it matter to you guys that we're having this conversation? Why do you think it's important?
Well, for me, I always kind of push that, like, I'm a very passionate person when it comes to merchandise design and printing, right? So like every shirt that I touch, I try and consider who the end user is, even if it's, just a coach of a soccer team, right? That dude is so passionate about these shirts that he designed for whatever purpose to benefit, his team or whatever. So I always try and just envision that end user and figure out what I can do to elevate, if it's possible, what's kind of come in front of me, Again, it's, for me, apparel, the first shirt I ever had printed was for my band, right? It was 24 pieces. We pulled all of our money together personally. We all had crappy jobs, and everything we had was in those shirts so that we could sell them to put gas in the van and then to order more shirts, right? So I always kind of think back to that when I'm working on somebody else's shirt, and if the graphic kind of sucks or if it's low res, and trying to find a way to make that good, to make it something that somebody will want to buy from them so that they can kind of get to where they're trying to go with it.
Yeah. Well, in my working with big brands, again, working with Echo was probably one of my funnest experiences. And one of the things I loved about Mark is that he truly didn't care what everyone else was doing. Like, he just cared about good graphics that were cleverly embellished. And that was the nice part. Working with a brand that already has like a really rock solid name, then it becomes, all right, well, how do we make this graphic and design and final print as innovative as possible? And that was it, man. Part of my job when I was with them was just to take that Rhino and just do 4 really, really cool things with it for every delivery season. So yeah, it's pretty important.
A question that I wanted to throw out, that I think a lot of people who may be watching the webinar may be thinking is, I have a production artist, or I am a production artist. Is there a difference between a production artist and a graphic apparel designer? What would your take on that be?
I think it depends on the customer, the client, right? A lot of times, like I said before, I receive something and I just have to figure out how to recreate it, right? Like how to put that on a t-shirt and make it look the most like their weird digital mock-up from whatever website they pushed it through. But then there are those customers that approach you and they want your input, it seems fewer and far between now and kind of the like digital age of t-shirt decorating. But, on those rare circumstances for me where people come to me and they're like, hey, like what could we do to elevate, or what could we do to make this better? Or, hey, we did it the first time and, we're doing a reorder, but we have these ideas. We kind of want, this to pop a little bit more in this area. And, those are kind of the circumstances that, I wish happened more, is communication with the customer and their openness, like when you're on kind of like the band merchandising side of things, a lot of things are kind of packaged and funneled through a website for ordering. And through doing that, sometimes you kind of lose that back and forth that's important for designing a good piece of apparel like that,
Yeah.
Yeah, and for sure, the production art versus the creative. Production art's huge. That's typically the last line before this thing goes onto the floor. And yeah, you need somebody that can absolutely, run all the steps correctly. The more mistakes you made in that, like the more more screens you're burning, the more stuff that you're wasting, time and materials. So yeah, there's a big difference.
Yeah, I think, the way that I see it really is that, a true graphic apparel designer in an apparel decoration facility would acts more almost as like the art director. LT, having spent time with you at Jack Prince, that's kind of the way I see your role, because I see the way that you interact with the entire company. You're everywhere, you know everybody, you know everything that's going on, and you understand, you have a deep knowledge of all the technologies going on there at Jack Prince. And I think that a production artist I see as being maybe more specialized. I would put, a separator and a digitizer, for that matter, under the production artist umbrella. And, it's the job of a graphic apparel designer to really utilize the expertise and skills of the production artist, and as part of the greater whole, the greater project of creating a finished piece. Certainly, production artists do not get enough credit, and they're absolutely essential to making the finished piece come out looking, coming to fruition.
Big time.
So, big question here is, for somebody who's looking to hire a graphic apparel designer, or if somebody wants to become a graphic apparel designer, how do you do that? How does one hire, train, or become a graphic apparel designer? Any experience with that?
LT, you got it?
KC, I'm looking at you, brother.
So it's funny. My journey into this whole thing, honestly, and as crazy as it sounds, in the early 90s, my dad bought this little Apple Performa computer, and I recognized, I was a printer at the time, but I recognized the logo on his computer and the logo in the art departments. So it became, honestly, like I went up to beg, borrow, and steal the, Photoshop and Illustrator copies so that I can install this thing on my computer. And then literally just forced myself to figure out, like I made up these two mock beer labels. And that was sort of my first, like getting to all the tools to be able to work to the point to do what I needed to do. But yeah, and as far as hiring somebody, obviously it's got to be somebody whose stuff is aesthetically pleasing to you, and it's going to be reproducible. It's you certainly want to make sure that apparel is what their graphic background is, because like I said, or I think Rick asked, can't put web banners on a t-shirt? Not really. You could try maybe, but.
Well, I know that both of you, all three of us have done quite a bit of hiring in this department. and all of us, I think, have kind of become graphic apparel designers without fully intending to do that. My take on it is I would go with experience first, meaning somebody who I would much rather pull somebody from the production floor who's had the hands-on experience and teach them and invest in them to get the computer skills, to get the chops that they need to do the digital side of it. But really having that experience, I think, is most crucial, in addition to, as you said, Casey, just like, obviously somebody needs to have, they need to have an artistic aptitude for sure, and passion. Passion's way underrated in this. But LT, you talked with me about hiring people with a music background.
Oh yeah, I was waiting for my window to cut in. Yeah, every great hire I've ever had has been some kind of musician or small business owner or both, right? And again, it just goes back to that kind of hustle of knowing that you have to create something, knowing that somebody has to be there to want to buy it to kind of get to that next level of what you're doing. And having that connection of, the customer to the final product is super important in trying to understand what you are doing with every job that you touch.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think having a connection and a passion with not only the customer, but with, obviously, most importantly, with the finished product is so critical. And I've been into so many print shops where you see people clicking around on my computer, they're doing their work, and they never even step on the production floor to see what the final result is of their work. And I think that that's just a recipe for disaster. And also, you're going to have a total disconnect with the production floor. And that's why so often you see the people on press are angry with the art department, because there's no understanding of what they're dealing with, the production considerations.
And that's not to say that you can't find somebody and you can't kind of spark that interest in them, but there really does have to be a passion for decorating, or you're just not ever going to kind of grow. It just won't be quality work. Like, there's a lot of back and forth that has to happen, and critiquing and just trying to understand your own shop, because your shop is going to be different from Tom's shop, from KC's shop, from mine. Everybody kind of has different things that affect the way that they print.
So I'm sure we can answer some questions here, but before we do that, I just want to talk about what we're going to cover in part 2 and part 3 in this series. Part 2 is going to be all about the process and how the design process is ultimately affected or dictated by priorities. And so the priorities would be more priorities which are dictated by the customer, by the brand that you're working with, or by the technology that you're working with. And if what is most important is the most important thing, recreating a piece of fine art, how is that going to dictate the types of components that go into that? So I'm really excited to get into that. Part 3 is going to be about production and practices. So that's like really how we do what we do. It's practical and technical considerations for bringing your design to the production floor. So Ray, you're back.
I'm back. And I think you guys have really covered it well, because we don't have very many questions. A lot of praises. Thank you for being on, is what they're saying. Most of them. We have like a who's who, people chiming in. One thing I want to say, we talked earlier about, how important it is about the T-shirts, and it really comes down to, even at the big companies like Casey worked at and Tom, you, even though it's a big company and you're doing thousands of the same print, it still comes down to a personal purchase for that consumer, and it means something. And there's a lot of pride in walking through the stores and seeing your print, or seeing a celebrity wearing it on TV. Or, I mean, I walked into a screen print shop in 1978 with my design for a fraternity shirt, and I was hooked ever since, watching the process and working with my brother and so on. So I took a summer job and never never left, basically. So, I mean, I think we're covering the subject very well. We have Angel Montoya down. He's asked. He's trying to reiterate. He goes, should a designer be required to have production knowledge? Because many of them don't have it in his area.
Well, again, I would say a true graphic designer doesn't necessarily. I think they need to have just the most basic information or basic knowledge rather of what we do. There should be, they need to understand what spot color printing is. They should understand the difference between an application for the web versus for print. But a graphic apparel designer, 100%, that's what this conversation is all about. They should be required to have production knowledge. And again, the three of us talking here today, that's really, I think we all kind of came from a production background, and it's quite frankly how we got good at what we do.
Right. It's amazing. And being able to talk to customers and designers with a little bit more in knowledge and being able to set that expectation with the customer, because you know how it's going to turn out. You don't necessarily have to explain to them that the ink's a little bit translucent and it's going to cause this to happen and all that. You don't have to tell them that. The farthest you have to go usually is to tell them, no, we can't print this 4-color process on that blue nylon jacket, without it looking different than what you're expecting it to. So, I mean, I think production knowledge is fantastic. If you have a really good designer, it's great to have a good designer. Make sure your separator has that knowledge, and make sure that the designer has no say-so on what kind of garment it goes on. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
For sure.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Any recommended resources for learning basic shops in Photoshop and Illustrator?
Yeah, I always had people that I was training start with all of the Adobe has a huge library of tutorials. And I think it's something that even if somebody came in and said that they had, experience working with Illustrator and with Photoshop, I'd still have them take all those tutorials. These are massive applications. And there are so often, with Photoshop, especially, for example, there's 10 different ways to do one thing. And so kind of getting a base now, I find new ways of doing things in Photoshop and Illustrator to this day. And I've been working with these apps for 20 years. So I think making sure going back to the basics and doing those Adobe tutorials are fantastic. Obviously, they add on features with every new release. And so kind of keeping up with the new features is really important as well.
We've worked with like our salespeople, trying to get them kind of to have a better understanding of Photoshop and Illustrator so that they, can identify issues right away when the customer sends them production art. And to do that with a lot of people that are kind of green, we used to use Lydia.com. They had like a really great kind of library of videos and tutorials that kind of walk you through a lot of the basics of Photoshop, Illustrator, the whole Adobe suite.
Looks like we lost KC.
Bye, KC.
R.I.P., dude.
Did he say something wrong? We voted him off the island.
It's a sneeze. He's quarantined.
I would tell you on this question, what happened to me is, I grew up on the first Photoshop and thought I knew what I was doing. And I went to a show one time, had one of those show passes, and was pretty cocky, but I had nothing to do. And so I walked into a beginner's Photoshop, and then I realized how much I didn't know. And I continued. I went to beginners, then the intermediate, and then the advanced, all in that same show. And it was mind-blowing, all the things I was doing wrong, but still making it work. Mm-hmm. And all the time I was wasting. So it's well worth going, even into the most rudimentary training, you find shortcuts that you didn't know about. So we might have Casey back. Let me see. Here he comes. Boom.
He's back.
He's back.
Sorry about that. The old router reset.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we're all having those trouble. I've been sweating here, hoping this doesn't go down. So, well, we're at 30 minutes. So I think, you know, we probably wrap this up. All these guys are going to probably look in one of these, wherever they're posted. You know, it's at the Poly1 Specialty Inks is the main one, but they're copied all over the Facebook world, I hope. And let's go in and answer the questions we can. There'll be a lot of questions next. I mean, we're on Friday, and then we're on the following Wednesday. So we have 2 more of these. You guys tune in, watch for us. We'll be posting the start times and everything, and we appreciate you guys coming in and sharing with us from your homes. And we lost Casey.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to doing it again on Friday and digging in a little deeper. Thanks so much for hosting, Ray, and thanks to Poly1.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll have this thing down a little bit better, and we'll be able to keep up with you guys. You flew through it. Very interesting. Thank you, guys.
Everybody stay safe. Thanks.
You too, Tom.